All right, I think we could go ahead. Hello, everyone, and thanks a lot for joining this webinar, where we're going to talk about data-driven ways to efficiently analyze and improve organic keyword ranks and traffic on Amazon. Super exciting topic, and I'm very excited to have with me Michael Swenson. Hello, Michael.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, thanks, and you.
Very good. Very good for a Wednesday. Yeah.
And super happy to have you, especially with all the work that you must have going on with, Black Friday and everything, right?
It's a little hectic. Yeah, but this is a welcomed downshift for a second to talk about fundamentals and yeah.
Exactly.
I welcome the escape.
So let's get started maybe with a quick introduction. Michael, would love to hear a bit more, maybe for people that are with us, a little bit more about your background and what you do at Rocket Bike.
Sure. So I have been working on the Amazon platform for over 10 or 11 years now. Yeah. And over that time, I went from some sort of side hustle while I was in a startup, just trying to generate some income through working on vendor and growing accounts on the brand side really aggressively. And so my transformation over the years has been pretty intense, and I've worked at many different scales and have learned quickly that many brands have the same problems at every scale. And then certainly there are more money, more problems issues that happen as well. And uh, Rocket Bike is really focused on, just helping brands get more out of the business that's in front of them today and really helping them get ready to scale for the future and start grabbing some low-hanging fruit. And one of the most important things for us is to make sure that there's a data-driven approach to everything we do, that there's a sound strategy. And with the understanding that, okay, we have 10 strategies, 4 or 5 of these may not work, but if 2 or 3 of them do, we're gold. And understanding that test and learn and repeat, it's part of everything that we do when we work with our clients.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. From my end, my name is Otman. I'm one of the co-founders of DataHawk. And before giving some additional context for those who are learning about DataHawk for the first time, I think a good segue into our topic today about data analytics in the context of keyword ranks and traffic would be maybe to take a step back and just talk about how the overall analytics and data space has evolved over the past 3 or 4 decades, right? And if we look at it outside maybe of the context specifically of e-commerce, you have maybe the advent of Excel in the 90s, and then the advent of SaaS applications and APIs in the early 2000s. And things accelerated so much, maybe over the past 15, 20 years, right? Where we've seen anything from Google Sheets to fully managed databases with AWS, with Redshift, with Snowflake, with many other things. And then something also super exciting and new that occurred is people getting increasingly more into using dedicated business intelligence and data visualization software solutions, the likes of Power BI, Google Data Studio, or now Looker Studio, and so on and so forth. And then increasingly more the rise of ETL solutions, the likes of Fivetran, Hightouch, etc., that made it so much easier to live in an era of using an entire ecosystem and not being on a kind of closed ecosystem as what was the case before, right? But what's interesting is when we look at how e-commerce has adapted this kind of change, it's been with a little bit of a delay, naturally, different industries, right? And I don't know from your end, Michael, but from my end, it feels like, okay, 2015, 2016 was kind of the rise of SaaS on Amazon, in the Amazon space, right? I think Helium 10, they launched maybe in 2015 or something like that. Django Scout around maybe a year before. DataHawk from our end, we launched in 2017. But what's interesting is right after COVID, it felt like there was a big shift and things accelerated, and the approach to conducting data analysis kind of morphed a little bit as well, where people
Yeah.
got into the bandwagon of using data warehouses and getting evangelized about the importance of having an e-commerce data warehouse and the importance of consolidating data from multiple places into a centralized dashboard on a dedicated BI tool, etc. What's your take on this kind of movement? Is it something that you've seen from your end as well?
Certainly, yeah. I think about the sheer number of tool providers out there and data partners that have emerged. I mean, it's pretty mind-boggling when you really think about it. And it seems to make, correlating this, not necessarily having direct data on this, this is my opinion. Clearly, we had a boom in e-commerce, which flung a lot of people forward. So there was more money to spend. Competition was getting, more aggressive at the same time because everybody was digging in. So it makes sense that reaching for more tools and more capabilities, I mean, it seemed inevitable. Looking back now, that was going to happen.
Yeah, and thankfully from our end, we try to change things as well and try to adapt. And the way that we approach this kind of shift and trend in the space is that we try to plug ourselves within an open ecosystem instead of locking people into a dedicated UI. And as we aggregate data from multiple channels now beyond just Amazon, we try to give people more control and more data ownership through a turnkey database solution that helps with storing all of the data that we collect and enrich. That way, they're able to analyze it anywhere they want within their existing ecosystem, right? That way, people who love Excel and Sheets can have the data flow directly and on an automated basis to Sheets or Excel. People who, I know you love Domo from your end, Michael, or Tableau, who love to work there, they can have their data flow there, Power BI, and so on and so forth. From your end, what's your opinion of an ideal tech and analytics stack when it comes to e-commerce and particularly Amazon?
Great question. Now, I want to answer this a little more straightforward, thinking about brands in general and maybe not just the agency perspective where we're required to really handle mass amounts of data. But it's really important to have a system that you can rely on that you are not constantly iterating with. So that tech stack should involve, some research tools. So you need to be able to see what's happening in the market. That's going to be categorical, search term analysis, even content monitoring. Those tools are going to be important. So it's kind of in the world of a lot of research and monitoring and reporting can be done. Obviously, DataHawk does a lot of these things all together in one. And then you're going to need, of course, automation tools. You're going to need advertising automation, your analytics, whatever you're going to use in that stack, whether it's, Power BI is a great choice, by the way, for most. That if anyone's vacillating, wondering which way to go, my recommendation is go to Power BI. Best documentation. It's really come along the last several years.
Very
And
scalable. Very scalable.
Very scalable.
Well. Yeah.
And even ChatGPT is good at helping you answer problems with DAX formulas. So there's a lot of great things you can do there. But the challenge becomes in the stack when you get to the data part and how much, how many aptitudes are there in an organization to handle, data management and collecting that data and keeping it in order is really, really difficult to do. Not to mention managing the connections or shifts that happen in table schemas. So that part, I recommend having, data partners to really help support the connection and the management and even the modeling of that data is going to be really, really important. So you can do it yourself, and I've done it myself a lot and hurt myself really bad. So we limit how much of that we do, even as an agency.
Do you think that brand managers and operators should pick up these kind of skills? Do you think that they should be proficient in maybe in the same way that they're proficient with using Excel formulas to do their analysis and create pivot tables, do you believe that moving forward in the next 3-5 years, they need to become proficient with using, a Looker Studio, a Power BI, Tableau, you name it?
Yeah, I think it's going to be, if it isn't already, at least for top players, it's got to be a prerequisite. You have to be able to experiment, explore that data, and learn from it quickly, and look through as many lenses as you need to. And you're really going to be limited if you're not able to do those things. But AI is going to help everyone do that a lot faster now.
Yeah. Well, can't wait for a conversational interface to build dashboards for me. That would be
I
pretty
think we're a
awesome
ways
to
off
have.
on that, but I think we'll get there pretty soon.
And so as we dive into our topic today about keyword ranks and traffic on Amazon, just as a reminder and something that's interesting to look at is, at least in the context of desktop search on Amazon, when you look at the structure of search results, most of the time we have 7 pages of search results, right? Around 70 results per page. But what's striking to me is the kind of split between organic and sponsored, and this has increased, by the way, a lot over the years. But I think it stabilized back in maybe 2020 or 21 at around 32% of the page being allocated to sponsored results. Do you think that this is gonna evolve, or that's kind of the optimum split?
I think that it will continue. My guess is that it's going to continue to increase until it's breaking things and then it'll have to be pulled back. I mean, I think that's the nature of any advertising program trying to grow, is they're going to keep adding placements and finding, innovating ways to reach consumers and connect the dots. But my guess is, it's going to become too much and they'll have to pull back further. Some would argue the situation at the top of search, which I know we've talked about before, is already a big problem.
Yeah, because now it's infuriating how the top of the fold can be 100% or maybe 90% occupied by just sponsored results. It's insane.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, and you think about mobile, we often spend our lives on desktop, but I'm always nudging myself to constantly stare at mobile when I'm researching things, looking at things, and how much further do you have to scroll on mobile to get past those sponsor placements? It's pretty wild.
Absolutely.
I do think there's some consumers that skip when they see sponsored sometimes, but I don't think that's the vast majority. I think it's just getting to the solution that makes the most sense.
As long as the ratings are there, the image is nice, and we're going to talk about all of this, the price, etc., you don't notice it as much. You don't look at it as much. And actually, the rankings are very interesting in the context of how they're influencing click-through rates, right? And something that I find interesting is that there's this linguist and philologist called George Kingsley Zip that came up with a law, a very empirical and interesting law called Zipf's law, which essentially posits that the frequency of use of the end most used word in a language varies as 1 divided by n. So hear me out. It means that the second most used word in a language would typically be used 50% as much as the most popular one. And the third most popular one would be used 33% as much, and so on and so forth. And the reason I'm mentioning this, and I find it interesting, is that, and fascinating, is that it kind of applies to the world of search engines. And you have this research that's been done a couple of years ago by Google Web Ranking Agency or software that essentially found that click-through rates in Google, they follow this kind of slope or trend where the Zipf's law kind of applies, right? And probably as you go to brand analytics and look at the search query performance report, you kind of notice similar trends on non-branded search results. Maybe typically position 1, 30% click-through rate, position 2, 15, 17%, position 3, 10, 12%, and so on and so forth. And the reason this is critical, and I'm emphasizing it, is this tells a lot about how important it is to make it to the top 5, top 10 spots, especially when you take into account how you're competing as well with sponsored results, because now we're talking position 1 or position 2 or 3 organically. In effect, on a net basis, you're probably at position 7, 10 or something like that. And so instead of getting a 30% plus click-through rate, you're maybe getting only 10% or 3% or 5%.
Fascinating.
From your end, would you say that the ranks are kind of your North Star? Do you obsess about reaching a certain kind of threshold?
We certainly obsess with, I mean, across the whole agency. I definitely do, but the agency at large, of course, right? We have to be at the top of the search terms that are the most relevant, with, you know, either the most highly relevant and or the most, you know, voluminous traffic. So yeah, it's a big deal. And it's always tricky to manage, and it's always hard to decide how deep you go and how many you're going to track. Yeah, and compare the weight against each other. I mean, that's, once you get all the way in there, we can all say, yeah, it makes sense, and tracking keywords and measuring ad spend against it, and then you get one more layer. It's like, wow, there's really difficult decisions to be made on what to focus on once you get in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the playbook of getting there, there's also making sure that you stay there. And a lot of brands, or a few brands and agencies that I speak to, they usually strive to kind of have some sort of alerting on that kind of ideal rank. So they make sure that they don't drop outside of a given rank once they make it, let's say, to the top 10, top 15, top 20, which is also quite important. And speaking of not dropping out of a certain performance threshold once you reach it, I mean, we all know why we're doing it in the context of Amazon, because we've all seen and felt this kind of flywheel effect, infamous flywheel effect everyone is talking about on Amazon, which eventually is nothing but, you know, the Matthew effect, or the law of accumulating advantages, the rich gets richer kind of thing, which also is fascinatingly applies to Amazon. And from our end, when we dived into the data and tried to look at how it reflects, maybe we could look at it from the context of keyword ranks, where typically here I took the example of a keyword like anti-aging moisturizer during the month of October of this year. And the lines, the kind of spaghetti chart that you're seeing here, depicts the keyword ranks, the organic keyword ranks. And you'll notice how once you're close to 0 or 1 here on the y-axis, meaning you get closer to the top spot, there's less variance there. It's more stable. It's more normalized. Mm-hmm. However, as soon as maybe you drop outside of the top 5, top 10 or something like that, it kind of gets all over the place and messy. So it's easier to make it maybe to position 40, 30, etc. It's very hard to make it to the top 10, top 5. But once you get there, you better invest what it takes to make sure that you maintain that spot. And
yeah, I love that chart.
Same holds true with BSR. Same holds true with BSR, actually. Here we took a given category on Amazon and looked at the top 100. I think the category I picked here is vacuum cleaner. And I picked maybe the top 60, 70 products on that category in the month of October. And it's even more so in here. It's even more so. It's so hard to displace the top 3, top 5, top 10 products. Once they get there, they're very hard to displace.
Makes sense. I mean, I think that's most people's experience with Amazon, right? Once you start winning and you start growing, unless you really start messing up on inventory or CX issues or pricing, something's wrong if you don't continue to grow. And continue, you know, you're stifling something somehow, if not, because that was always my experience, even 8, 9 years ago.
And so let's get into how we can,
for you, harder for everybody else.
And actually, let's get into how we can get there, right? How can we make it to that valuable top 10, top 20? Sure. And to do so, we gotta talk about the top ranking factors on Amazon, right? And maybe on the first one we have, which ones would you maybe think about from your end when we talk about the top ranking factors?
Well, I think we'll have a mix of, I think we all know there's so many. If we think of it specifically from Amazon's perspective, they want products that sell well consistently and they have great supply of, right? But we have to do all these things to make sure that happens. They also they don't want to deal with returns, and it needs to be a good deal for them. They need to be making some profit and yada, yada, right? So when it comes to what we can influence, we know that all these ranking factors are here, and it is, as I think you have on a later chart, which is fantastic. Like, these are all how much control you have or how difficult it is to change them or influence them. It varies. But content, while I think a lot of folks would say like price, inventory, ratings, all very true. But without the right content to get you in the right context of the whole platform and to convince and convert that consumer, none of these other things are going to matter, because you can convince and convert on different price points. So to me, it's got to start with the content and the catalog data itself, the product attributes, for sure.
Okay, so that's typically the number one thing that you try to optimize for. You have a product, it's been developed, it's there, you can't do much to change things anymore. Number one, you nail the content.
Yeah, you have to, because you're leaving things just open. You have no idea how successful you're going to be, and you don't know what you're just missing. If that content is not right, spend advertising and drive them to the page, but it doesn't convert well. That's an easy way to put it. Why would you do that? Well, you're spending time, which is still money, by not having this right. And you're missing out on opportunity every day. It's not just your ad performance. It's, the game of accumulation, like you said earlier, is real. So the longer the stuff is right and tweaked the right way, it also gives you peace of mind to move on to the next thing and start iterating.
And taking content as an example, how do you typically go about optimizing it while being kind of data-driven?
Yeah, so the different bits of content, I think we all I think have talked about SEO a lot, and so I'll kind of skip that one and just say we know that creating titles that make, that hit all the buttons that are going to make the cutoff for mobile and desktop, that are going to have the right words and influencing words. It's not always about keyword stuffing. But once we get into the creative, think about all the secondary product images, or at Rocket Bike, we refer to those as storytelling images. A lot of times what happens is brands will take their content plan, put it together according to whatever else they're doing with that product somewhere else, or how they dreamed up that product in a sales sheet or something. But the truth is, we need to leverage data from the market, so right from like the retail side, from ads, we need to leverage who's ranking and analyze those competitors, their content, also on the creative level. And then in terms of getting that conversion power, a real powerful punch to add to that is a legitimate sentiment analysis. Not the ones that are kind of nerfed and simple that you see on some of the platforms, but a true, classification, tagging, sentiment analysis, and then leverage that information to set and reset expectations in the content. I won't go any deeper on that, but what I will say is, once you're on the product page, one of the biggest, contributors to conversion is going to be that secondary, product image content, and it just has to be done right. Assuming you've already kind of validated price, ratings, and title, and the image of the product before you even got here. So I can't stress that one enough. I will get off that topic. I'm very passionate about it, as you know, but it's something that is so easily missed by so many, and it makes such a huge difference.
To summarize, you're saying that you start with benchmarking and seeing what the competition is doing. instead of
Yeah,
kind of maybe entirely reinventing the wheel. So you see what the best players on page one and such are doing at scale. Maybe you conduct a sentiment or word analysis on what they're using, to which position, how many characters, things like that, but also do so in the reviews, potentially. And all of that also comes in combination with the importance of focusing on the images,
of course. Yeah.
not just
It,
the
it
main one.
takes, yeah, it takes all of that, right? It takes fusing together all those details with the brand's priorities. It's not setting them aside. The hard part is
Yeah.
getting that, delicate balance right. And the one thing I'll say, so all that, yes. The one thing I would add is that still a gap analysis has to be done. To assume that your competitors are the only source of truth for what's going to work would leave you without an advantage. So a gap analysis of what's not happening in their content, what's not happening in their titles that should be, also helps you get a competitive advantage. So typically for us, it's analyzing all the data, what's ideal, what needs to be here, what are the top priorities from all these, and how do we weight them? But then really understanding, so I'll say it this way: categorical data and the overarching, profile of search terms and things versus what's happening inside a competitor. Both incredibly useful. You just need to look at both.
And probably the top 3 KPIs we can look at as we make those changes or A/B tests and see the impact they're having on the content side, at least, would be what maybe the item data quality or listing quality score, some sort of a unique score to help us gauge the extent to which our A+ content is nailed. We have sufficient number of images, they're qualitative, good enough title, description, bullet points, and so forth. So that's maybe number 1. Number 2, click-through rate, and number 3, conversion rates, right? One of those is tricky. One of those is tricky to assess, click-through rates. How do you assess that main image you have, that you've nailed it, that it's actually the right one?
Right. So obviously, the more advertising you're running, the easier it is to get a controlled test on things that are coming in from search. Amazon's A/B tests are great, but they still focus on conversion. They don't really lean into giving you real specific details on click through, especially because they're spot testing. So, we don't really know. So the ratio of organic versus advertising and running a test that's as controlled as possible. Okay, there's no promos or holidays coming. And we have, no major changes coming to ad spend, no inventory issues. You need a clean run. You could test a lot of content that way. But you're going to need to be looking at page traffic and variance there. And then, of course, keeping it honest by looking at what's happening in advertising. So we have to make assumptions with CTR. There's many other ways we've tried to measure it, but the truth is, usually if you're investing aggressively in content, there's ad spend going with it. And so that really helps.
Okay, so mostly from advertising. You avoid making A/B tests to ads. You look at how your CTRs are on sponsored product campaigns focused on that given product you're optimizing for, and you assess that in combination with conversion rates, whether they're paid or organic.
Yeah, and I wouldn't just say for, let's say we just compile all the data for everything attributed to an ASIN, that would be a mistake. So it should be, what is it for a very reliable branded term or group of terms? What is it for a really reliable campaign? Not just little bits of data. It needs to be stuff that's been really consistent for months, and then, oh wow, there's a notable change or no change once you do that.
Yeah. So moving on from the content piece, which to your point is something you have maybe more control over than other things, there's also the topic of price. And I think to some extent, there's a very important notion of kind of price market fit or price keyword fit, in the sense that there are some keywords that are just not worth chasing because you just never will make it to page 1 on them, given a specific price. And on that particular topic, my approach and recommendation usually is to look at the kind of delta that you have relative to the mean or median of the competition for that keyword. So typically you're trying to make it to page 1 or the top 10 spots. You look at what's the mean and median and max price of other products you're competing with for that particular keyword or set of keywords. If they're priced $50 and your product is $100, there's no way you're gonna make it to page 1. So you may just move on to the next keyword you wanna work on. Is that the kind of right approach in your opinion as well? And how do you combine that with the kind of prioritization you have over short tail, mid tail versus long tail keywords?
Great question. This all falls under the, I don't know, the headline of competitive relevance to me, where I'll try not to skip ahead here, but ratings and reviews are right there with price, right? So if there's a rating profile and and a price profile that are just massively different, and depending on price point, you could run this on percentage. So let's say, I know an example we had when we were defining what's price relevant. Well, plus or minus 20% when it's a $16 product is pretty tight. 20% of a $50 or $100 product, it's not, you can't just use a flat percentage. And so understanding the whole categories dynamic versus the keyword dynamic to decide where you're going to invest really helps that situation. But yeah, in the past, if the ratings are 4.8, you're living in a 4.3 reality, and you're 40% more expensive than everybody else, it may not be the right keyword for you. And if you're seeing that everywhere, by the way, it might be time to iterate and innovate on the product side as well. But that's a bigger question.
And do you often see kind of 2 to 5% price changes to be big, to be having big impacts on conversion rates, click-through rates, keyword ranks, or usually you need a much bigger change?
Yeah, so we're talking a 2 to 5% change. It depends on the category. Largely, I think it depends on where you were and what you're trying to get to, right? So if you change your price to become, just in line, and you're gonna try to grow based on price, you're gonna have to try to beat them at least a little bit. And if it's a hyper competitive, maybe not permanently, you might do that through promotions and coupons and things, but yeah. So yes, I've seen instances where a simple, 5, I would say maybe 10% change in price would have a positive or negative effect. But I've also been delighted to see a 25% increase sail right through, and everybody's just, why did we not do this sooner? So it all should be tested.
Happy with the margins then.
Yes, of course.
And maybe just to highlight these two topics we just discussed about maybe price and also quality, ratings, reviews, stars distribution, and such. I took here in the example of the same keyword we've seen earlier, anti-aging moisturizer, and split the results with DataHawk by page. And it becomes quite interesting to see the kind of dynamics on this keyword. Typically, page 1, first thing that you see here, let me maybe just add a way for me to highlight this. So first thing you notice is this, right? 98 products competing on page 1 in the month of October, 98 unique products. So you see how it's much harder to get to page 1. There's less kind of volatility, and it's not as fragmented as page 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yes, so to clarify for everyone, right? This is unique products that happen to show up on page 1 throughout the entire 31 days.
Yes, absolutely right. Correct. That is correct. Yeah, thanks for clarifying it. And on the topic of price, well, we typically see it here, right? Average price, whether it is average or median price, maybe more the average reflects that. Average price rather lower on page 1 relative to other pages, but more interestingly, the max price you see here, right? $72. If you have a moisturizer priced higher than $72, statistically speaking, there's no way you would make it to page 1 probably. So you may as well go try to rank for high-end anti-aging moisturizer or premium anti-aging moisturizer or something like that.
Right.
And we see the dynamics with the ratings as well. 4.5 stars on average on page one. If you have a 4-star or 4.2 star product, in all likelihood, you may not make it to page one in here. And maybe the last one that's quite interesting is the ratings and the social proof you need to have. It's insane to see how on page one on a median basis, you'd need 5,000 ratings to make it to page one. At least that's the median. Doesn't mean that you absolutely need to get there. Proof being the fact that there has been a product with only 3 ratings making it to page one, which is highly reflective of that kind of honeymoon period and chance that Amazon gives to any newly launched product, unlike something like Google or other search engines, right? But yeah, quite interesting to see this, and maybe keep it in mind when you're trying to optimize and prioritize your time and efforts when it relates to what keywords you're trying to rank for, because very often you have people asking you, how come I'm not making it to page one, right? Or why aren't we on page one on this keyword? We're investing in ads, we're doing everything it takes. Well, if the competitive environment makes it so, you won't be able to make it to page one if you don't have that kind of price and quality fit with the keyword.
That's right. One thing I'll add that's really valuable. So along the lines of your last slide of you're looking at this time period and this profile of, a keyword. It's also important for all of us to look at our products and how they're performing more recently with review ratings, for example. Because Amazon is not just looking at the total number. They're looking at, okay, maybe this product's been around for 5 years, but like the last 2 years has been kind of a 4.7 average. Amazon's just not looking at just the entire history. So it's important for us to know the trend in our reviews and what that's looking like, the overall profile of them, to analyze our competitive. I guess to speed myself up and getting this out of my goofy face. When you're looking at, am I competitive? Are my reviews competitive? Certainly the consumer might look and see if there's a massive difference. But in the terms of Amazon's system, if you're trending up and you've been really strong and you're like, man, we've been 4.8, you should test that. If you have substantial data and there's, significant sales, that's the one caveat I'll make, is that if you have a good track record and you just have a legacy listing that's been around a long time, but all your recent reviews and things are good, you should consider that some extra weight. I have a mathematical equation for that, but you should.
Let's take another example. Let's focus maybe on page one. So here, this is filtered to the first 48 spots, usually page one at least on desktop, on a few other related keywords. The first one we were talking about earlier was anti-aging moisturizer, right? So let's assume we have a product priced at, I don't know, $80, $90. How should we go about prioritizing our efforts and focus on specific keywords from this list? $80, $90, it's eventually maybe, let's say, newly launched products. What should we focus on?
I'll say a few annoying things first. Is this a multi-pack? Is this, materially different? Is it more volume? Is it,
okay, interesting.
These key questions, right? Running this into this situation a lot on the CPG side, where it's like, well, this is a 3-pack and we don't want to sell this as a 1-pack. Maybe it works in that situation. I don't think most customers are shopping by the cost per ounce or things like that, but I think when it comes down to it, it could help tilt the scale.
And speaking of which, that can be a good way, creating, 1-pack or lower units variations. That can be a good way to have a lower price variation that you use to capture that kind of traffic and eyeballs, and eventually cross-sell to a higher priced item.
That's right. That's the first question I always have in some of these scenarios, is if If it's just a CE product and it just is what it is, fine. But a lot
Yeah.
of products like that, can you adjust volume? Some of it means, logistics and co-packing challenges maybe. But yeah, so that would be the first question. And then how to approach this. If it's the only way forward, then getting in there and really testing as carefully as possible. So if we're saying we had an $80, $90 product, we see that the median price is really consistent here.
Yeah.
And so I would probably filter through this data here and look at more specifically who's winning. This becomes less of a, I can just kind of summarize. Now I need to pull thread. I need to see how competitive are some of these that are in the, I don't know, 70 plus price range. And is anyone winning and doing a really great job, or are the prices that we're seeing maybe just anomalies? And so I want to dig into that and just, okay, give me some examples of some products that are winning here. Yeah, at that price point, and then let's see if we're competitive on a features level, reviews level. Yeah.
And from my end, some of the things I would look at would typically be the fragmentation on each keyword. So typically here I see that anti-aging face cream for women, there's more volatility there, more products making it to page one. So maybe it means also lower competition to some extent, or higher odds for me to make it there. Though the price isn't maybe as high as others. So maybe I would go for maybe something like a collagen moisturizer for face, which has a higher price point, and maybe would help increase my odds of making it there. Would likely take me less ratings to reach it, but then of course the trade-off becomes the search volume and the fact that you're going to have a lower volume, which is always an interesting trade-off to look at. Should we go long tail, short tail? But eventually, very often it's a multi-step approach where maybe you work your way up from those less competitive keywords, secure your top spots there, and then use that as a fuel to go to the next higher difficulty keywords, right?
I agree. Yeah.
So we spoke about maybe the PDP PDP side of things.
Sure.
But now we're getting into the more exciting bit, in my opinion, which is sales, right? We've all seen how sales, and particularly sales velocity, is impacting in an insane amount keyword ranks. And of course, when we talk about sales, we gotta talk about the split between organic and paid. And there's no better way to influence overall sales than through paid sales, meaning through ads. And so when it comes to this kind of lever, where does it sit in your list of priorities?
Just advertising investment overall.
Yeah.
It's very high. I mean, it's basically everything that we've just discussed is the baseline. Do we have an understanding of how competitive we are? Are listings optimized? Is our creative conversion strong? And the very next thing, aside from, yes, we know we have to have inventory, and we'll set those things aside. It's very high. And in terms of influencing organic rank from a position where maybe you're on page 2 or 3, it is likely going to be the only way that you're going to do that, unless you have some sort of, outside massive earned media or something, that we're not going to see here on the platform, which happens sometimes. But like inside this bubble of Amazon, people use the term pay to play. It certainly is. It is. It has been for a long time. There were just lots of fun anomalies for a long time that you could get around. And yeah, I don't think that's really true anymore, that you have to do it now.
And how do you go about assessing the kind of necessary ad budget? You have a new client that comes to you, newly launched product. How do you go about telling them that they actually need to be on that kind of pay-to-play approach with maybe a bigger investment early on to give the product that kind of push?
So showing the data in an just unfiltered way and being just a trusted advisor is the most important part. Let's just talk about brass tacks here. This is the reality. This is what it looks like. But that's coming from, and that it should be that way. The problem that brands have, and I can say this from working inside one before, several, is that we have our own biases of what it should be or what our profit formula should be. And certainly some of those are requirements. There's a business to run. There's a P&L at the end of every month that needs to make sense. But we have to come at from two different angles. What will the market bear? Can any of our innovation break through some of that and maybe make that more cost efficient? And certainly increasing conversion is why I always come back to the content. It's why I obsess about it so much, because it's often just a stone unturned. But we also have to come from the side, the position of the business, of the brand itself, and what's going to make sense for them. And typically it's finding someplace in the middle. What we're going to find in research and the cost of, advertising and current sales and all that is always going to be more than the brand is going to want to do. And so the job of in-house teams and or outside partners is to be smart and clever enough and measuring data constantly to bridge the gap, to get that cost down and get better performance for the brand. It's tricky to do, but the key is always going to be constant communication.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's the biggest part. And I mean that again, whether you're in-house or at an agency, it's you have to be able to pass up, to report up and convey like what it's going to take. And I will add one more thing, which is it's often not discussed enough when. So we think about, this is the ROAS I want to be, or this is the tacos percentage I want to be at. And when we launch these products, great. My first question is, by when? Because we set our sights on something that might not be realistic. And then every month, every week, we're looking at it as a failure. And then we're pulling the ripcord instead of, we expected this to take 3 months to get to this point. So the goofy little phrase I said many times is tacos on a timeline. Like, what's it? What are we willing to spend to get there? And then, yes, we have to optimize, but we know we have an uphill climb until, Amazon really starts to favor this listing because of its sales history.
Exactly. Yeah. In terms of budget planning, there's a lot of evangelization to be made with management with regards to how on, let's say, month 1, month 2, you're probably going to be at 100% tacos. Then it gets to 80, 70, 50, and it's not from day one that you reach that 7 or 10% tacos, but it takes time. Another thing that I found that's quite interesting is that many people kind of dilute their advertising budget over a larger catalog instead of focusing it on a few hero SKUs and pushing those hero SKUs to actually dominate the top results, which is too bad, right? From my perspective, I think, and I always recommend taking it step by step and taking a good chunk of that budget, focusing it on a given product, making it reach certain performance, and then gradually scaling it back down as you try to nail and measure that kind of normalized or steady rate ad spend you need to have long-term to sustain a given rank, which is, by the way, a lot of correlation work that we're going to talk about in a bit.
Yeah. Fantastic call out.
Maybe the last one is service, FBA, in-stock rate, aged inventory, seller feedback. I think everyone is super familiar now with the importance of being FBA, having good inventory management, making sure that they have something. Also, I've noticed quite a lot is Amazon's algorithm looks at your FBA inventory. They don't look at just are you FBA or not, but why on earth would they push you to position 1 or 2 or 5 when they know that you don't have the inventory that's necessary to sustain that, the sales that are going to stem from being on that rank, right?
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. It's really plain to see it. If you look at the vendor side, you can see when the POs come in, they're setting the forecast, and it's going to correlate to your ranking. And so, yeah, it's true on both sides. You just get a truer sense when you see what Amazon actually is willing to take on as a liability. It gives you a little more insight into, what they think is going to happen and what they're willing to let happen. To be quite honest.
Absolutely, yeah. And speaking of the correlation game, we did the exercise with one of our customers, and they're in a very competitive space. They're in the consumer electronics space, and they have headphones, etc. So competing with very big players. They launched maybe their products back in November or December of last year, something like that. And they used to rank on page 4, page 5, naturally on keywords like wireless headset and Bluetooth speakers and so on and so forth. And what happened is that, as you can see here, they shot up from position 100, 150, 200 plus to literally the top 10, top 20, top 30 spots within 6 to 10 months. And what's interesting is, as we dived into the data, just as an example to outline the kind of impact that ad spend has, you'll notice that there's a big correlation. And that improvement came as a result of ramping up ad spend. So typically, December ad spend was literally 20 times higher than November ad spend. And then Q1 ad spend was almost twice as much as December ad spend, and so on and so forth. And that's what led to that result. And something that I always recommend doing is just looking at analyzing the data. There are two variables that one needs to start from. The first one is, we spoke earlier about this, right? We spoke about units per day. So the first one is units per day, overall units per day, not even organic units per day, just your overall units. You draw a table, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 30, how many units did I sell? You put that in column A or column B. Then column C, you look at your ranks, and maybe in column D, your traffic, right? What was my average rank on my top 3, 5 keywords that I absolutely want to optimize for? And as you do this, you start to see the correlation. And you can go to something just like an Excel and draw a scatter plot and a trend line, and you start seeing the trends. You start seeing that, oh, here on the x-axis, we have units sold. On the y-axis, we have organic ranks, and this is actual data from this example. You see the correlation here factor that's quite high, and you start to notice that, oh, actually, in order for me to break through page 1, I need to sustain a given number of units sold per day. And so that becomes a North Star. It becomes, okay, how can we be selling 50 units a day instead of just 30 units a day? Which brings me to the second point about ads. We said earlier, right, that advertising is probably the number one lever that you could use once you nail, of course, content on all the basics. And this second chart to the right actually shows on the x-axis ad spend and the y-axis keyword ranks, organic ranks. And so naturally, since ad spend has a direct impact on sales, well, you start noticing that, oh, actually, I need to make sure that I invest this much per day on ads to generate that kind of extra lift and boost that I would need to sustain the organic ranks. From your end, Michael, how does this kind of correlation exercise come into play? Because from what I see, a lot of brands tend to get overly focused maybe on just advertising and ROAS and total ROAS, and they don't look at things and how they're being intricated and how advertising impacts organic performance on Amazon.
Yeah, so a lot of things have happened over the last several years since you and I have known each other, but we've we've seen the emergence of, on the ad side, the top of search placement becoming so important. But the truth is, organic ranks are still, let's just say we set aside the sales data or the sales that happen from them for a second, set them aside for just the sake of this first part. It's still an indicator of what Amazon thinks of this product and its value in correlation to this search term or this, leaf node. And so it's still very important to understand where your position is in the category when you're talking about these high volume search terms. But the correlation between ad spend and measuring, when we're targeting those keywords and what's happening over here is really, really important. It can be tricky to do without the right tools. But I think increasingly, it's going to be the only way to succeed. Organic rank, even though it's, the placements are more and more hidden, that just makes them more and more precious, quite honestly, because they're supplementing all of the paid conversions that you have. So you have no choice. But I think what's important to call out is also something that we do pull from DataHawk, to this day, even though we continue to iterate with so many data practices, this understanding where that ad placement was, page 1 or page 2, where was it? That's really important to know. It's important context when you're reviewing the data. Okay, we're not there. If you throw in top of search on top of that, now you have a pretty clear picture of, right? Like, okay, we really need to continue to work on our ad strategy itself, and make sure that it makes sense. But there's certainly inextricably linked. Keywords are keywords, search terms are keywords. People are searching this way. It's going to cause an ad to pop up, and it's going to cause organic, placements to pop up. And we just can't lose sight of that. They are all still one and the same. There's just two systems running. One is an additional layer of fees, which is advertising.
Yep.
That gives you a fast track to the top. Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot, Michael, for all the insights. We haven't had any questions so far, so if anyone has any question in mind that they'd like us to go over, please feel free to share it on the Q&A section. Maybe while we wait for 1 or 2 questions to come up, anything else you'd like to share, Michael? Maybe a success story, a tip, a recommendation, a best practice?
Yeah, let's think. Well, I can give one quick success story that I just loved. So if anybody knows anything about the coffee aisle on Amazon, it's very competitive. It's really aggressive. And one of our favorite, I would say probably for most of the agency's success stories, was taking a small coffee brand up to the top, maybe 3rd placement. At one point we were 2nd of Cuban coffee. And the way that we did that was aggressively narrowing down on these search terms. And I'm going to spoil this ahead of time and say it was not complicated. It was just relentless. That was the point of this one.
How many search terms?
If I remember correctly,
5, 10, 50?
It was maybe 5 to 7. There wasn't a massive amount of ad spend.
Okay.
We also limited, sprinkling advertising around like fish food across ad types as well and different placements. We really focused on search first, and then as it grew, we could expand. But we got down deep into the details of SEO that then informed, the categorical data, the search term data, the competitive data, and that informed, of course, the SEO strategy that we put in place right alongside it. That was part 1. We updated some content. We updated the main images, established what we call visual prominence, which just means standing out, looking like, really increasing that perceived value and looking the part and looking different, capturing attention without being gaudy, right? It still needs to really make sense for the brand and for the platform. And when we had those basics lined up, we hit SEO. it naturally fell into place that all the priorities we had there were the same priorities on advertising. And I think we get sometimes too caught up on especially the era of, um, migrating search terms from auto to, yes, sure, yes, we should always like research and test things. But I think on the ad side, we get too obsessed with that. And instead of just looking at the data, it's right in front of us. Let's invest in these. These make all the sense in the world given these metrics. And so, yeah, we watched it climb. It was very expensive at first, and then it wasn't, because Amazon wanted it to win, and we got better and better chances. And I think that's the other part is, I'll end on this part, is just to say, with advertising, is not as simple as just an auction. You have to be qualified to even be in that auction increasingly. Whereas years ago, it was kind of, just like Walmart's platform is evolving right now. So there's heavy qualifiers on whether or not you're even going to be considered to even be part of that auction,
Right.
or whether you're going to get some remnant, table scrap at 2 a.m. Or something. So anyway, it made a huge difference. We learned a ton as an agency doing it, and there's nothing more satisfying than taking a new product or a small brand and pushing them to the top of something, because that's always the true test of whether a strategy works or not. In my opinion, it's the truest test, I should say, anyway.
Oh, great job on that one. And we have a question from Nicola, who's asking, from your perspective, Michael, what's a healthy percentage of revenue coming from ads versus total revenues?
Oh, I'm going to be slippery on my answer, but not on purpose. It really depends on the category and the state that you're in. So if you're launching a new product, you could expect that to be, maybe even in the 70% range. Some people settle around 50. And what I'll say is, if it's more than 50, it's worth taking a look and really analyzing, should it be this? Does it make sense for the organization? And maybe we're spending too much in advertising because the product profile might not be a great fit, or we need some other options here, on the product level. But I would say my gut is that 50 is going to be that line of delineation where if ads are doing more than organic and it's a decently established product, I don't mean been around forever or have massive sales, but it's been around, you've done advertising. It seems like that would warrant, closer look at that point.
Yeah, so good point on mentioning the category, because if you're in a space where you have a high repeat purchase rate, I think your North Star needs to be more your lifetime value and
Sure.
your LTV CAC ratio relative to looking at just total ROAS or ad generated revenues versus organic revenues. And so maybe from a tacos perspective, what would that look like? A 7 to 15% range, or?
Yeah, that differs by category too, but I don't think anybody is really okay with like 20% tacos for an extended period of time anymore.
Yeah.
With the profit model that we're all living in. I think seven is a dream for those who are in the high teens. And if you're, again, it just depends on that repeat purchase value. But yeah, I mean, if we're going to say average, there's so many different categories to consider, and cost of manufacturing, that some, would be 15 would be impossible for. But yeah, I mean, that seems like a healthy zone if we're somewhere around there, 7 to 15. Yeah, 7 being sometimes a really tricky one to get to. Sometimes it's really hard to get to the single digits, and until you've got really
Right.
strong subscribe and save situation is usually what gets you down to those single numbers.
And it all depends on the growth stage at which you are. Definitely those
Absolutely.
numbers won't be reached if you're trying to grow, I don't know, 100% year over year.
Exactly. And how much brand recognition and affinity you have. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, we're a little bit over time. Thanks so much, Michael, for all the insights and tips. Thanks everyone who's joined us. We'll definitely be sharing the recording of this call, and see you next time.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Mike. Bye.
Take care.